Tuesday, the 1st of September. It has rained today. It rained yesterday, and will no doubt rain tomorrow. We were again confined to the house all morning. My mother determined we should all spend our hours of confinement indoors being useful. Jane and I were set to hem a mountain of petticoats. Lydia and Kitty, aided and abetted by Mamma, unpicked the trimmings on Lydia's new bonnet. They changed the pink ribbons. It was chosen for its pink ribbons, for green ones. It was agreed between the three of them that the green were far more becoming. A useful debate then began as to some new muslins my Aunt Phillips had spied in Meryton, and this debate grew lively, much to the offence of my sister Mary, who had been reading to us all the while from a great weighty book, a collection of sermons. She snapped it shut and stalked about and lamented the fact that she alone in this family took a proper interest in pious discourse and moral questions. I remarked that when it came to such matters I found Miss Burney's novels more instructive. At this Mary gave a loud sniff. She should condescend to make no other reply, and so the morning continued ill-humoured. By early afternoon Jane and I could bear being shut up no longer. We resolved to go out for a walk, and at this Mamma set up a voluble protest, claiming we should muddy our skirts, spoil our shoes, catch cold, and ruin our father with bills for doctors. It was a hard lot, she said, to be the wife of a gentleman, yet to have her nerves continually plagued by the need for economies. It was painful to be able to indulge in a proper dinner of 2 courses only once a fortnight, whereas Mrs. Long and Lady Lucas suffered no such constraints, as, of course, they never ceased to remind her. Jane gave me a quiet glance. We both knew that Mamma had begun on her favourite recital. Next we would have the iniquitous laws of entailment, and how, having failed unaccountably to produce a male heir, she would, on the occasion of my father's death, find herself cast out of her own home with 5 unmarried and then unmarriageable daughters. On such occasions my mother is always dramatic, and my father's demise is always imminent. Jane and I stayed to hear no more. We made our escape, just as Lydia interrupted and began on a new wheedling plea, supported, of course, by Kitty. They began to remind Mamma of the next ball in 3 weeks' time, of the utter impossibility of Lydia's attending said ball in a gown which everyone had seen 1,000 times, and which was, besides, no longer in the forefront of fashion. Mamma, who can refuse Lydia nothing, was about to capitulate, as she always does. So much for domestic economy. The air was fresh from the morning's rain, and the sun was bright, if fitful. We walked a little distance, thinking of calling in to see Charlotte Lucas. Deciding against, we cut across the fields and found that without discussion our footsteps were taking us in the direction of Netherfield. We stood side by side quietly and looked across the valley to the eminence beyond, to the splendid park, the drive, and the graceful facade of Netherfield, the first house in this neighbourhood. Our housekeeper, Mrs. Hill, says the rumour is that Netherfield is shortly to be occupied. She heard it first from our footman, then from Lady Lucas's cook, who had it from Mrs. Long's housemaid sister's cousin. The identity of the new tenant is, as yet, unknown, a source of frustration, this, to everyone. It is widely agreed that the new Netherfield establishment will be a fine one, but will the new tenant be a married man or a single one? In her quiet way, Jane was considering these rumours, I suspect, as we looked at Netherfield. Jane is beautiful. She is good. Her one failing is her incapacity to think ill of anyone. But Jane is 23. A dangerous age, this, if you are known to be without fortune. I felt a rush of love and indignation. I clasped Jane's arm tight in mine as we descended. I wished we did not have to place every hope of future status and fulfilment on the possibility of our fixing some young man of desirable lineage and irreproachable income. To be a wife, to be married, Jane yearns for this, as perhaps I do too in my weaker moments. Yet at home at Longbourn our daily view of married love is hardly felicitous. My father married beneath his station. He was regarded as a catch for my mother. Yet has marriage fulfilled my mother's hopes? If I am truthful, it has not fulfilled my father's. This could not be said to Jane. It would have shocked and pained her. So I held my tongue, and we talked of nothings instead, most companionably. By the time we were in sight of home, my spirits had lifted. The evening passed much as usual. My father lamented a few times the extreme foolishness of his daughters, but he smiled at me as he said it, as if to exclude me from his comments. We ate an excellent family dinner, with the saddle of mutton dressed in a new way, according to a receipt my mother obtained on her last visit to my uncle Gardner in London. Mamma declared it a triumph, far superior to anything she had ever eaten at Lady Lucas's table. After dinner my father retired to his library, and I returned to Miss Burney's novel. Mary practised the piano, and invited us all to admire her relentless industry. My mother, Lydia, Kitty, and a subdued Jane played at cards. Lydia talked and talked and talked. She won handsomely, as usual. I think I alone noticed that, also as usual, she cheated. Friday, the 4th of September. The weather has improved. My humour has not. Each day passes the same as before. I long for something to happen. We sew, we walk, we talk, we play at cards, we pay our morning calls and receive them. My mother chides me. Do we not live in a beautiful and civilized country, she asks, with diversions even London can scarcely rival? Do we not dine with 24 families? Indeed we do, I replied, and when we sit at their dining tables, I can predict the evening's conversation at every one of them. Mrs. Long will boast of her niece's accomplishments. Sir William Lucas will recount for the 1000th time how it was at the court of St. James's on the day he was presented. And my mother denounced such cynicism roundly. This afternoon Lydia dragged my sisters on a shopping expedition to Meryton. I remained behind and went for a walk with my father. He seemed despondent and preoccupied as we set out. He had been going over the monthly account books all morning. But he was soon restored to his spirits. He began to tease me, and I responded. I wondered how deeply it pained him to walk here where his family have lived for so long, and to know he has no son to inherit. On this subject, though, he will never be drawn. On the only occasion I risked the topic, he turned it aside in a joking way, and said it was widely acknowledged that sons-in-law were a deal less troublesome than true sons, adding he knew he could rely on Lydia and Kitty at least to provide him with particularly foolish, and therefore amusing ones. My father's company restored my humour. By the time we returned, while conceding that Sir William Lucas was indeed tedious, I was ready to acknowledge him a kindly man for all that. I resolved to be more charitable and less prejudiced in future. My intentions are almost always as consoling as acts. By dinner I was even ready to tolerate Lydia. I made no sharp remarks, and preened, I admit, at my own virtue. Saturday, the 5th of September, a day of great moment. All morning there were rushings to and fro. One caller succeeded another. Mrs. Long the first, Lady Lucas shortly after. My mother darted about. There were whisperings and exclamations, and the house reverberated with some undisclosed excitement. My friend Charlotte had accompanied her mother. Catching my eye as I entered the dining parlour, she drew me outside. We walked up and down in the garden while I plied her with questions, and she provoked me by delaying answering them. "Oh, surely I must have heard," she said, with a small, sidelong teasing glance in my direction. Why, the whole country was in a hubbub. Her mother had rushed out to impart the news, scarcely pausing to remove her curling papers. Relenting at last, she told me. It was now known, on unimpeachable authority who was to be the new tenant of Netherfield. "It is a widow," I cried. "I feel sure of it, a mournful widow with a great collection of unmarried daughters." Charlotte smiled. She informed me in her dry way that, fortunately, I was mistaken.